Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's Healthy Aging Conversation hosted by Care Visions. I'll introduce my guest this week, Helena Herclotz, in just a couple of minutes when we get to 4 o'clock. But whilst you settle in and get your cups of tea and get ready for a fascinating half-hour conversation, I just wanted to bring you up to date with what Care Visions have been producing. As you know, regulars on this slot will know that every week there's a wide range of videos and other programming that Care Visions produces. And I've been trying to update everyone on everything that's new every week. Well, this week I've been defeated just by the sheer volume of the material that Care Visions is putting out there. There's one new video I'll mention, which is called Share Music, Fashion and Reinvention, where she's described as the goddess of pop. Now, that's obviously a matter of opinion, so that may provoke some Facebook discussion. But there's a new video in the keeping with this tradition Care Visions now have of videos pretty much every couple of weeks around music icons and music leaders from the 50s, 60s and 70s, and bringing us now a little bit more up to date. So we are delighted that there's this program about Cher and her music coming up for you to enjoy. In terms of the live classes program, this is where I struggle because there are just simply so many. And the idea from Care Visions is that there's a range of live classes that you can get involved in every week. And that you can get involved in ones of areas that you wouldn't normally think about, knowing that being involved is stimulating your body and mind in a joined up way is the secret to a good, healthy aging and a good life. So there may be some people who've just come straight from the vocal workshop, the first vocal workshop that was held at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Tomorrow, there's a dance workshop at 2 o'clock. And on Thursday, there's the first Arts for Healthy Aging workshop at 11 o'clock in the morning, proving to be very, very popular for people to enroll with that one. Also on Thursday is what's called a couch concert at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, where you can sit back and enjoy violinist Anouk Smate playing her violin, not singing her violin, but playing her violin. And then on Friday, there's a continuation of the exercise programs, the physical exercise program at 10 o'clock in the morning, which is described as easy, but it's not that easy, but it's accessible for everybody. So do join in if you want a little bit of physical exercise on Friday morning. And at 3:30 in the afternoon, the self-massage class, which somebody said, how do you do a massage class on Zoom? Well, the point is it teaches you how to do massage for yourself. So it is actually very accessible and very effective. So that's just a few of the things coming up this week. The other one that's coming up on Friday is the next of the book clubs run by Care Visions, where the great-great-granddaughter of Charles Dickens, Lucinda Hawksley, hosts a book club. This week, it's the first of 2 relating to Agatha Christie. This one's about not a fiction that Agatha Christie wrote, but her own description of an archaeological excavation in the Middle East called Come Tell Me How You Live. And that's the book that will be discussed this Friday in the book club. And then in 2 weeks' time, we'll go back to the fiction that Agatha Christie had inspired by her visits in the Middle East. And this time it's Murder in Mesopotamia on the 27th of November. So that just gives you some of the programming that's coming up from Care Visions. Please do go to Facebook and look at all those classes. They're available free of charge for the time being so that everybody can have a chance to enjoy and benefit a range of activities, as I say, promoting physical and mental well-being. So I'm now delighted to welcome Helena Herclotz, who's the Older People's Commissioner for Wales, as my guest this week. We're going to have a fascinating conversation for half an hour or so. Anyone who wants to ask a question of Helena, please do use the chat function on Facebook, and we'll try and squeeze in a couple of questions towards the end. But Helena, thank you for joining us. The role of Older People's Commissioner was established, more than 10 years ago now in Wales, and you've been in post about a year and a half. And it's all about promoting the rights of older people and supporting older people to live well and effectively as they can in their communities. Helena's got 30 years of experience supporting older people in services and campaigning. She was the Chief Executive of Carers UK, before that at Age UK, its predecessor Age Concern England, and before that at Anchor Housing. So she's got a lot of experience, and over the last year and a half, I've been applying that experience to the benefit of people in Wales. So I wanted to start just by giving people a chance to get to know you a little bit, Helena. When we're all feeling a little bit challenged by the world we're in at the moment, can you give me an example of something that's brought a smile to your face and made you feel happy in the past week? always good to start on a nice positive note.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. It's great to join you today. I mean, I think the thing, to be honest, that's really done it is probably the result of the US election. And I reflected on that because sometimes these sort of big issues, you don't realise that they actually do make you anxious just about the way the world is and what's happening in different places. I actually felt, not just a smile on my face, but a sense of relief really as I saw the result coming in. And maybe sometimes we underestimate the impact of those big issues that are just there for us that can create some anxiety. So I probably had more than a smile. I was definitely celebrating over the weekend.
Yes, I think many people were glued to the television to actually have something other than coronavirus to talk about,
yeah,
and to see democracy in action, and with a very decisive outcome. And there were some pretty tenterhooks moments, and for Donald Trump, there's clearly some decision making still to be made. But it does seem a very clear outcome that I think will move things forward and enable people to take a sort of fresh look at the next 4 years. So I'd agree with you there. And what about I talked about the Care Vision's live classes and the physical exercise, the mental and spiritual stimulation classes. What do you do to yourself to stay physically and mentally alert and active?
Well, there's a few things really. I guess it's changed a bit since lockdown. And I've always loved walking, so walking's always been the way in which I kind of switch off and relax or think through issues and problems. So I've certainly done a lot more of that. I guess the other thing about having, being physically and mentally well is also having a sense of purpose in life. And for me, I've been so lucky to have worked with older people for most of my life, which is absolutely the thing I've wanted to do. And I guess even though the last few months have been unbelievably challenging and quite heartbreaking in some ways to see what's been happening to older people, that sense of purpose for me has been, very strong and very much to the fore. And I think that's kept me going when things have been difficult. And it's, at least I feel I'm in a role where I can make a difference.
Yeah, well, that's a really good way of looking at it. And I know that personally, if you don't mind me sharing, I know your dad was diagnosed with vascular dementia just earlier this year, which is another layer of challenge on top of the whole COVID crisis. How's that gone in terms of getting used to a diagnosis of dementia and living with it?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, we knew for some time that he probably did have dementia. It took us a while to get to the point of getting him the diagnosis. It was useful to know it was vascular dementia. Actually, that was something that was sort of helpful, so we know exactly kind of what we're dealing with. I mean, the challenge for me is he's 4 hours away. He's in another country, so I'm in Wales and he's over in England. And as we know, lockdown restrictions are different. So that physical distance is really hard, actually. And one of the things we're doing, we're using technology to stay in touch. And actually, just to give you a bit of a flavour of that, he's 89 now. He lives on his own and has done since my mum died. He cared for her for many years. And his job, he was a Church of England vicar, a minister. And one of the things we've done since lockdown, me and my brothers, is every evening at 6 o'clock, one of us video calls him and we do evensong with him. So that every evening he has this moment that he absolutely enjoys and connects with his family, but also connects him to his faith. And also what's interesting is that when he's doing evensong, he's much more confident himself. You can hear the years of doing this as a vicar that are so embedded for him. And it's become a very special thing that we've all done, actually. It's become a very... That's
lovely. I think for him that must provide a sort of anchor moment in the day that he can look forward to and know is going to happen.
Exactly, it does. And, he tells us what to read and what the psalm is and what the reading is. Right. So we're all learning a lot more about the psalm.
Let's turn to your role as Older People's Commissioner. I mentioned the rights agenda at the beginning, and I thought of you yesterday when I was watching the BBC News, because they announced that it was the 25th anniversary of the Disability Discrimination Act. But can you just bring all the viewers up to date on age discrimination legislation? Because I think not everyone's aware that there is, both nationally and internationally, a strong rights-based legislative framework that we're operating in.
Well, there is, and sometimes, ageism is called the unrecognised discrimination because I think it's less known and maybe even still less understood. But as well as 25 years of Disability Discrimination Act, we've had 10 years of the Equality Act. So, age discrimination most of the time is illegal. There are a few areas in employment where there can be sort of justifiable things around age, but on the whole, age discrimination is illegal. There is a legal force here in the UK, and also increasing interest internationally on strengthening this, both in terms of the UN and elsewhere. But it is an area of discrimination which I think is still probably not taken as seriously as it should be. And, even in the language that you see, I think there's still a lot that happens that stereotypes older people, that leads people to view older people as a kind of homogenous group and in one way, that's deeply, deeply damaging. We know there is a direct effect between age discrimination and how you feel, both physically and mentally, as an older person. So it's actually one of the reasons that working to defeat ageism and age discrimination is one of my kind of 3 priorities as Older People's Commissioner in Wales, because I think it's at the root of so much that is wrong for older people, and in the way that older people viewed and are treated, and in actually the way we view ourselves as we age.
And do you think, because I think it is deeply embedded in the way people think, and I highlighted this year in the Black Lives Matter, is how racism is actually, an awful lot of it is subconscious and people aren't aware of the behaviour they're having. Does the same apply to age discrimination, that it's actually often subconscious or people unintended action, activity and behaviour that needs to be tackled?
I think it's both. I think it's both, direct and indirect and overt and covert, and also some people just not really thinking or being aware. So, my starting point would be it's endemic within society. So if you're part of a society that is, by default ageist, then you have to work harder not to be ageist or discriminatory. So, if you just think about when you go into a shop to buy a birthday card, there comes a point in birthday cards where they're starting to tell you that it's a bad thing that you're a certain age, that all the birthday cards, probably over about 50 or 60 years old, are pretty derogatory, really. And we've seen, actually, going back to the US election, we've seen some pretty terrible things in some of the tabloid press over here around, comments about both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. One of the tabloids had a headline around, the person that wins it is either going to be senile or kind of demented or something. I mean, it was outrageous when you think about it. So there's a huge amount to do to change the way in which the media cover issues about aging and older people, to really make sure that the law on ageism and age discrimination is implemented, that we challenge people unrelentingly, actually, but also that we provide people with the support and guidance to enable them to do things right. But I think we've got a long way to go. And I actually think the pandemic has probably laid bare some of the ageism that's with us.
And challenging people is clearly an important part of it, but a lot of older people will feel nervous about making that challenge, whether it's in work discrimination or social life or in the street or in the shops. What's your advice you would give to people who feel, I don't like the way I'm being treated, but I don't feel bold enough, I don't feel confident enough to challenge and take it on?
And it's hard, isn't it? So one of the things we've actually been doing over the last year or so is been running a campaign called Everyday Ageism, where we're encouraging people to kind of call it out when they see it. And along with that, we've been doing some training, some sessions with older people, talking about what ageism is and talking about rights, legal rights, and how things can be challenged. So we're directly looking at how we can help older people to do that. I think, I mean, part of my role is to do that on behalf of older people as well. And I have a set of legal powers that I can use to hold public bodies to account for the way in which they're serving or not serving older people. And then I think there's something about the institutions and wider society. So, the health service or social care services, making sure that when they're doing their equality and diversity training for their staff, they absolutely properly include the issue of age. And we need all that embedded, really, because it's too much, I think, to put all the responsibility on the individual to challenge. It's hard. So we need to try and equip people to do that, give them confidence, let them know about their rights, but also do the bit to change the system and the institutions that they come across.
And is there a sector that you would point to, or even an individual organisation that's been particularly good at changing the way it behaves towards older people? Is somebody you would say, look, this shows what can be done, they're doing a good job?
I don't know if there's a particular sector or organisation that I draw attention to. I think, you know, there are examples of organisations who particularly focus on elements. So we know, for example, that some employers have been particularly good at making sure they're not discriminatory on age in their recruitment and hiring and promotion practices. So we've certainly seen some employers who do well on this around age discrimination employment. We've seen unions do that as well, actually. For example, in Wales, the TUC here has done a very good sort of guide on making sure that workplaces are free of age discrimination. So there's definitely, you know, places that one can look to draw from and to celebrate what they're doing. But I would say they're probably in the minority at the moment, and there is really a long way to go.
And I'm going to ask you a more difficult question you might want to not answer, or you might be happy to answer. Anyone who you particularly think you think need to pull their socks up a bit more and do a bit better than they are at the moment?
Well, I think my observation would be around the pandemic, actually, and what we've seen around where issues of sort of rationing have come to the fore a bit. And I do think we've seen some worrying indications that, you know, age-based rationing or discrimination in health services, not just here, but actually across the world, can happen. And that is deeply worrying. So, you know, I think on the whole, within the UK, that hasn't happened. But I don't think we can think these things are hardwired in sense of equality. I think we have to be very vigilant, particularly now, to make sure that, you know, age-based rationing doesn't happen. I mean, we do have that within the NHS at the moment, actually, particularly around things like cancer screening, where some of the age limits, I'm not sure, are fully backed up by evidence. So we do need to continue to push on those things. And I think we do need to be vigilant, particularly now that, you know, some of that discrimination doesn't come in by default.
And do you think there's a risk, now that everyone's started talking since the news yesterday from Pfizer about a potential vaccine, is there a risk that will be made more available to younger people than older people? Or do you think people understand that those most at risk are older people and therefore that's where the vaccine should start?
So from what I can see, that's understood, and actually, you know, all I've seen is a focus on sort of health workers, and I hope they include care workers as well, and those most at risk. So that would be, you know, the obvious place to start, the evidence-based place to start, really.
Yeah.
So far, that seems to be where people are focusing, which is good to know.
Well, that's reassuring. What about the second part of your role? You said you had 3 priorities. I know you talked to me about, which was ending ageism and age discrimination, stopping abuse, and promoting healthy aging. We'll come to the promoting healthy aging last, maybe, but just moving on to the tackling abuse. England doesn't have, and I think Scotland doesn't have, an older people's commissioner, but Wales and Northern Ireland do. Does that give you a position of authority where you can actually take up cases of abuse and use the law effectively to almost do test cases, I guess, and to highlight some of the issues that need addressing?
Well, I think it's a really important role, actually. I think it does give you the opportunity and, if you like, the platform to do things. So it's an independent role, first of all, which is really important. So I'm truly independent. I have a statutory basis and a number of sort of legal powers, so I can assist individuals. I can use individual cases to make wider sort of points in terms of what needs to happen in policy. I can hold public bodies to account. I think on the issue of abuse, and one of the reasons I made it one of my priorities, is it's something that's been under the radar for a long time, but affects thousands and thousands of people in Wales and, you know, across the UK and across the world in lots of different ways, whether that's domestic violence, sexual violence, financial abuse. And it felt to me that as Commissioner, I have a particular opportunity really to bring different organisations and individuals together to work collectively on this. And also for me, you know, getting things right for older people can be about tackling the most difficult issues and not shying away from those. And I think abuse is a really difficult issue. It creates there are lots of sensitivities, really, because it can happen within families. Of course, it can happen within care settings or hospital settings. So we are now working with over 40 organisations in Wales. We've come together as an action group. We're, you know, trying to increase the awareness of it, improving the support, dealing with some of the short-term issues that have been caused by the pandemic. And I've been incredibly heartened and inspired by the way in which people have come together to tackle this. And I do think we're going to be, leading the way on some of this work in Wales. But there's a huge amount to do to sort of get this issue out of the shadows. And coming back to your earlier point, Jeremy, to give people confidence to come forward. And one of the things I've heard from, people who've gone through this, particularly domestic violence, is we are way away from really getting the right services and support in for older people experiencing domestic abuse. Most of the services are geared to younger people. So, many older people don't know where to go if this happens, and maybe don't feel that it's right even that they raise these issues, because they grew up at a time which was very different from now, where particularly as a woman, you have very few rights. You have very few rights in marriage, very few rights generally. And, I've had some conversations with older people who've lived with this for many, many, many years and have not until later life actually found that they've been able to raise their voice and to seek help. So it's a huge issue affecting many, many thousands. And I think if we can really make improvements in Wales, I hope that will also be something that other nations can learn from as well.
And on a very practical level, I think people are aware of there being refuges for people subject to domestic abuse for younger people. Are those same facilities currently available for older people, or is it pretty difficult to find that kind of, because that's often, there's a very short-term need to get out of the abusive situation that you're in before you can even do anything to tackle it longer term. And do people have somewhere to go, or is that still a big problem?
It's still a problem, and we've been doing some work just recently mapping what's available, and it is an issue. So there are some places which are more geared to older people, but most of the refuges are not geared towards older people who may have care and support needs. And the other issue also, which is important for older people, it's not always just about them fleeing. Sometimes the best thing is for the perpetrator to be taken away,
to be moved out. Yes.
Yeah, and that also presents a lot of issues which are not sort of necessarily dealt with well at the moment. So you're absolutely right. We need to improve the kind of accommodation support that's available, and we're having those discussions about how we can do that in Wales right now.
Yeah. Moving on from domestic abuse, the other one you mentioned that we haven't really talked about in these weekly conversations is financial abuse. And over the period of coronavirus, we've seen examples, particularly of online abuse. And I think many of us, probably all of us, get those phone calls or those emails pretending to be from somebody saying, you need to give us your details. I'm from your bank. I need your details to protect your bank account or whatever. Is that seen an increase? Is there something that we need to be doing more about to protect older people from those financial abuse, particularly online?
We do need to do more. I mean, every time something happens, and the pandemic is no different, criminals will find a new way of trying to make us anxious and trying to get money off us. And they are, very, very clever at those crimes. So there's a lot we need to do in terms of awareness and support for people. And again, that's giving people the confidence to come forward if it's happened. Some reason why older people don't is because they feel ashamed or they feel stupid. And actually, we need to say, it is not that you're stupid. It is that these are very clever criminals who do this full time and find ways of getting money out of people. Yeah. And we also need to make sure that if these financial crimes happen, that justice is served, if you like, that actually these things are prosecuted if they are crimes, and that sentences or the right sort of sanction is given. And I think that's important as well. Sometimes we call these things kind of financial scams, and actually that's too nice a word for what it is.
Yes.
It's nasty crimes.
They're crimes.
And actually the impact is not just financial, the impact is emotional on people. It can really threaten people's confidence. So again, in Wales, we're working together with lots of organisations and people trying to do all we can to increase awareness, to make sure these things stop happening. And we just need to keep at that, because too many people are facing this, and the consequences, both emotionally and financially, are really serious.
And would you have one top tip for anyone who's worried about financial crimes affecting them? What would you say to anyone who feels they may be victim of a crime or subject to potential crime?
Well, I think, the first thing is, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. So if someone kind of, says you're owed a tax refund or whatever it is, generally these things are not to be treated seriously. And the second, I think I would say, is just take your time. So often the way in which these crimes happen is that people put pressure on you to have to do something immediately. So actually take your time. If you're not sure, ask a friend or a member of a family. And if you think there's anything wrong, then, the police or trading standards are the other people to contact. And don't feel you're wasting anyone's time. You're actually doing other people a service if you bring this to light.
That's a good way of looking at it. You're not just doing it for yourself, but you're doing it to protect other people. Let me quickly move on to the third of your priority areas, because that ties into what Care Visions is all about, which is healthy aging and enabling people to have a good later life. I mentioned some of the material that Care Visions has produced online and their live classes. What kind of things can all of us engage in that enables us to live well as we get older and to enjoy later life to its full, even if we're living with health conditions and issues that do have an effect? And we shouldn't ignore those. But what can people do to support themselves and support others in healthy aging?
Yeah, so we're focusing on aging well, and one of the things we're focusing on is the development of age-friendly communities. So the World Health Organization is a network of age-friendly cities and communities across the world. And actually, I would say it's even more important now that we do this collectively. So we can all do that within our communities, is to make sure that we're not creating barriers to older people and to ourselves as we age. So everything from, are there benches to sit on if you're going into town, to what's the street lighting like, to, the planning for housing developments and so forth. And on an individual basis, I think it comes back to those issues of, aging is something we need to work at ourselves. So, there are things that we can do to try and make sure that we can age as well as possible. And one of the things I'd highlight, actually, because it's been very sort of current, is the whole issue of loneliness and isolation. Mm-hmm. And we know that that's very damaging for us, both physically and mentally. And when the campaign to end loneliness started here, there was a report done that led up to that. The title of the report is one that has stayed with me, and I think it's really good advice. And it's called Safeguarding the Convoy. And it's this notion that as we go through life, we have a convoy around us, maybe our work colleagues, our friends and family, and they're the people that we turn to if we, we're having a bad day or we've got problems. They're the people that we have a laugh with, that we socialize with. And as we go through life, we can lose some of that convoy. We maybe stop work, friends and family move away or die. And what we need to do is work at how we can safeguard that convoy, how we can make sure that we do what we can to stay in touch with people. And that's actually stayed with me, and it is something I've tried to do, actually, because you can suddenly turn around a few years later and find that some of those people that meant a lot to you in life, you've kind of lost touch with. So I think that's a really practical way of sort of thinking about it.
And one of the good things about the campaign to end loneliness is it's involved so many different people and organisations. And one that inspired me was the fact that the co-op, as a shop in your local community, have got really involved and realised that they've got a part to play as a retailer to help tackle loneliness. And often maybe the only people someone sees, the only other people someone sees during the week is the local shopkeeper, and the part they can play to connect people back into their communities. What about the specific issue around lockdown at the moment and coronavirus, about visiting families and friends in care homes? Because that has been a big issue. A major concern for people at the moment is, will they be able to be with their families at Christmas? I don't think you've got a crystal ball that's got the answer, but what would you say is the best approach to take to that issue of visiting your loved one who might be in a care home?
Well, I've spent a lot of time over the last few months working and trying to support people who live in care homes and those who work there and their families. And the visiting issue is heartbreaking, actually, because some people haven't seen their loved ones for months and months and months. And I worry a lot about the trauma that people are going through right now and will go through in the months ahead. So I've been working with other stakeholders and with Welsh Government on this issue. And a lot is being done to try and enable safe visiting. So there is a real focus here in Wales on how we can make that happen, by Christmas. There was already guidance to encourage care home providers to do that safely, to do those risk assessments, to try and do all they can. But we have to understand both the challenge for care homes, their anxiety about COVID coming into care homes and the deaths that can happen, and sadly seeing that again. So here in Wales, we're looking at, you know, all the issues around testing, making sure PPE is there, making sure infection control is there. We're looking at whether for some care homes, the development of sort of pods that can be very quickly installed or built on could enable that as well. So I think this is an area actually where all those involved with care homes and Welsh Government are working very closely at the moment.
Well,
it
it's
has
good
to happen. I mean, it absolutely has to happen.
Yes.
Because it cannot be right that older people in care homes do not have those rights to see their loved ones. So
well, I think it highlights the need to look after people's mental well-being as well as their physical well-being. Exactly. And I think everyone's very well aware of that. We're almost out of time, so I'm just going to squeeze in one question. A couple have come in, so I'm only going to take one because it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, and actually to me it's a very good question. So this is from somebody called Laura, who says, how many countries in the world have older people commissioners, and do you work together on issues of global significance?
Well, to my knowledge, the only countries that do have older people's commissioners exactly like this is here in Wales and in Northern Ireland. So it's a network of two, actually. So Eddie Lynch in Northern Ireland, and we do work very closely together. And particularly over the last few months, we've been working very closely together. I know there is interest in the rest of the UK, in England and Scotland, about having older people's commissioners, and actually I think that would be very welcome, because I think there is there's strength to be had in having a network. There are in other countries in the world, there are roles that sort of incorporate some of this, but there isn't, as far as we're aware, there isn't this role elsewhere other than here in Northern Ireland.
Okay. Well, I'm going to squeeze in one more. I've just lost it on my screen, but there was a second question which actually sounded very relevant to what we were saying. So this picks up on what was talked about earlier in our conversation. This is somebody called Mary, who says, on the question of age-friendly communities, have you got any in Wales? And what would tell Mary that she's living in an age-friendly community? How would she know?
So that's a great question. So in Wales, I think we've got lots of places that are age-friendly, but none of them are yet members of the World Health Organization network. So that's part of the work I'm doing, is working with local authorities, the 22 local authorities in Wales, to help them do the work that will get them kind of recognised as an age-friendly community. So what you would notice is that the things that might get in the way of you enjoying your life in the community are not there. So the barriers are not there. So you will feel also that you are a full citizen in that community, that your voice is heard, you have an opportunity to get involved, you can access the health and care that you need, the transport works for you, all those things are there so that you can have the best possible later life. So if you feel that and you feel kind of involved and supported, then you're living in an age-friendly community, and that would be my ambition for everywhere in Wales.
So that sounds good. And so watch this space for registration in the World Health Organization programme from communities in Wales. Helena, we're right out of time. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. It's been fascinating learning what your work is doing in Wales and the difference you're making, and I'm sure many people will be inspired and think that perhaps we need a commissioner for England and Scotland as well. So thank you for joining me. And next week, my guest will be Veronica Franklin-Gould from Arts for Dementia. We've talked about music for dementia, but Arts for Dementia takes it to a wider canvas to draw a pun on the issue of art. So we'll hear from Veronica Franklin-Gould same time next week. Please do join me then. Thank you once again to Helena for being my guest this afternoon.
Thank you.